Our top story takes us to the U.S., where the Trump administration has unveiled a $1 trillion stimulus package to mitigate the economic fallout, of the COVID-19 outbreak. The coronavirus pandemic has killed over 100 people in the country. The U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin says, in addition, the White House has proposed over $300 billion worth of tax deferrals. Mnuchin said the Treasury will also provide $10 billion of capital to the new fund facility from the Treasury's Exchange Stabilization Fund. The package is larger than the U.S. response to the 2008 financial crisis and amounts to nearly a quarter of what the U.S. federal government spent last year. Well, the UK has announced $423 billion in financial measures to shore up its economy against the coronavirus impact. Well, the European Union has sealed off its external borders to curb the spread of the coronavirus in the area that has now become the epicenter of the pandemic. The move comes after Italy reported 345 more deaths from the virus over the past 24 hours, bringing its death toll to over 2,500. More on that now in this report.
The number of COVID-19 cases have globally reached 197,000 with over 7,800 deaths across 146 countries. Leaders of the European Union have discussed the measures to combat the new coronavirus. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the bloc has to do its utmost to protect its people from the deadly disease.
This is an external shock, and it hits the whole world. We have never had that before. The enemy is a virus, and now we have to do our utmost to protect our people and to protect our economies.
Brazil and Turkey have reported their first deaths from the coronavirus, while Kyrgyzstan and Montenegro have reported their first confirmed cases. Australia has declared a human biosecurity emergency, giving the government power to close off cities, impose curfews, and order people to quarantine.
We will impose a universal precautionary self-isolation requirement on all international arrivals to Australia, and that is effective from midnight tonight. Further, the Australian government will also ban cruise ships from foreign ports from arriving at Australian ports for an initial 30 days, and that will go forward on a rolling basis.
Meanwhile, China has reported only one new domestic case of coronavirus for the second consecutive day.
Now, Russia says the situation with the spreading new coronavirus is under control in the country. President Vladimir Putin told a government meeting that health officials were able to contain mass penetration and spread of the pandemic. The Russian president said the situation is generally under control despite the high-risk levels. Russia has so far reported a total of 114 cases of coronavirus with no deaths. Putin appealed to citizens to act with self-awareness and urged officials to provide accurate information. The deputy prime minister has also dismissed concerns that authorities may struggle if thousands of Russians require respiratory support. In other news, former Vice President Joe Biden has crushed his rival, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, in the latest round of America's Democratic presidential primaries. Biden defeated Sanders in the states of Florida, Illinois, and Arizona by wide margins. Biden's decisive victories have earned him a nearly insurmountable lead over leftist Sanders in their race for the party's presidential nomination. With most precincts reporting, Biden beat Sanders by nearly 40 percentage points in Florida, 20 points in Illinois, and over 10 points in Arizona. The pressure is mounting on Sanders to end his campaign as Biden secured his 19th victory over the last 24 primary contests.
Today, it looks like once again, in Florida and Illinois, we're still awaiting to hear from Arizona. Our campaign has had a very good night. We've moved closer to securing the Democratic Party's nomination for president. And we're doing it by building a broad coalition that we need to win in November.
Well, U.S. President Donald Trump has also won the Florida and Illinois Republican primaries, making him that party's presumptive nominee. Well, the United States has imposed fresh sanctions on Iran, keeping up its economic pressure campaign. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says 3 Iranians were blacklisted for engaging in significant transactions to trade in petrochemicals. Pompeo says Iran's Armed Forces Social Security Investment Company and its director have also been blacklisted for investing in sanctioned entities. Meanwhile, the U.S. Commerce Department has said it will add 5 Iranian nuclear scientists to its entity list for aiding Tehran's atomic program. Earlier, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said U.S. sanctions have drained Iran's economic resources, impairing its ability to fight COVID-19. The foreign minister said Washington is literally killing innocents, calling for a global campaign to disregard U.S. sanctions on Iran. On to Iraq, where 2 rockets have struck the capital Baghdad's high-security green zone near the U.S. embassy. Security officials say the projectiles hit an apartment building and wounded 3 people. They said no diplomatic missions in the green zone were affected. The spokesperson for the U.S.-led coalition, Miles Kaggins, said the rockets fell at least 2 kilometers from the embassy. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack yet. Earlier, rockets hit a military base at Bismaya, where U.S.-led coalition troops and NATO forces are deployed alongside Iraqi troops. Turkish, German, British, and French leaders have discussed the crisis in Syria, including the migrant issue. In a statement, the Turkish presidency said the leaders also discussed methods to send humanitarian aid to Syria's Idlib province.
The video conference involved French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The conference came after Turkey opens its gates to migrants trying to enter Europe last month. Ankara says with 3.7 million Syrian migrants in Turkey already, it cannot absorb another refugee wave. Ankara also warned that due to incessant attacks on civilians in Idlib, 1 million refugees were moving towards Turkey's borders. President Erdogan said diplomacy and cooperation mechanisms shall be operated more actively in this difficult time. The leaders also discussed joint measures against the global coronavirus outbreak.
Well, the Indian government has ordered a continuation of the communications blackout, including an internet ban in occupied Kashmir. The valley has been reeling under India's curfew and clampdown for the last 227 days. The Indian Home Ministry said the ban will remain due to the alleged security scenario in the occupied valley. The ministry said restrictions on mobile data speed have been imposed to prevent the misuse of social media by Kashmiris. The 8-month-long shutdown has caused medical, food, and humanitarian crises in the valley. Indian authorities have arrested top Kashmiri politicians and pro-freedom leaders to curb all voices of dissent. Well, China has called for the resolution of the Kashmir dispute as per the UN Security Council's resolutions and bilateral agreements. This comes after a meeting between Pakistan's President Arif Alvi and the Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing.
Pakistan's President Arif Alvi visited China on the invitation of President Xi Jinping. Meeting in Beijing, Xi assured Alvi of China's support over the Kashmir dispute. In a joint statement after the meeting, Beijing said it opposes any unilateral actions that complicate the situation in Kashmir. Both sides reaffirmed their support on issues concerning each other's core national interests. They called for international efforts to help create lasting peace in Afghanistan. Beijing also hailed Pakistan's support to China's fight against coronavirus outbreak. China also said it is taking the best possible measures to ensure the safety and the health of Pakistani nationals, including the students. During the visit, the two leaders also witnessed the signing of various MOUs.
Police in India's northern state of Uttar Pradesh have asked Anti-Citizenship Act protesters to either pay a fine or face jail. Police sent notices to 13 people in Lucknow to pay 2.1 million Indian rupees for damages during demonstrations. Police said the deadline to pay the fine ended yesterday, and these individuals have to now pay 10% more. It said the demonstrators have a week, failing which they will face civil imprisonment and attachment of property. Security forces earlier put up the photos, names, and addresses of 57 people on hoardings across the city of Lucknow. Meanwhile, 21 people have been forced to submit 80,000 rupees through a draft after receiving similar notices. Well, the UN says EU border restrictions will affect plans to transfer hundreds of minor refugees out of dangerous camps in Greece. Earlier, the European Union announced it is closing its external borders to all non-essential travel from third nations to contain the COVID-19 pandemic. The special coordinator for the refugee and migrant response in Europe said all possible measures must be explored to expedite refugees' relocation. Migrants at the Turkey-Greece border are holding demonstrations demanding Athens open border gates. Meanwhile, the UN Refugee Agency has said it will temporarily suspend the relocation of refugees in new permanent homes abroad because of travel disruptions. In a statement, the agency appealed to countries to ensure that movements can continue for the most critical emergency cases. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has ordered a nationwide vote on the constitutional amendments on April 22nd. Citing Putin, local media said the vote will take place if the epidemic situation allows. The amendments, if passed, would allow Putin to run again for another 2 terms for president, despite the current constitutional ban. There had been speculation the vote would be postponed due to the spread of the coronavirus, but Putin has stuck to the previously established date and scheduled the vote for April 22nd. And coming up next in this news bulletin, 50% of harvest could be lost in 2 years. And a former railway station is now a cultural center. Welcome back. Coffee farmers in the Philippines fear for their harvests after the Taal volcano eruption. They say as much as 50% of the harvest could be lost over the next 2 years. Meanwhile, there are fears that another eruption could be right around the corner.
Even though her coffee plantation is covered in ash, farmer Olivia Lansing still expects a sizable harvest this year. It's the 2 years after that which she's worried about.
So for this month, January, we're about to harvest this. But because there are no more flowers, which will be the fruits for the next harvest season, no more leaves, they're falling off. So maybe approximately 10% for this season will be lost. But for the next 2 years, it will be like approximately 50% will be lost.
Coffee was introduced to the city of Amadeo by the Spanish centuries ago. Today, it's the Philippines' caffeine capital, but the devastation unleashed by the Taal volcano could prove disastrous for the local industry.
These trees still have some berries left, so we might still be able to sell coffee. But next year, there won't be any left because it needs to recover. It would be better if they survive, but if they don't, it will have a big impact on us because you will need to do a lot of work and a lot of capital will have to be invested to replant them.
In an attempt to mitigate the situation, the government has introduced new subsidies for coffee makers and provide them with extra plants. But this will do little for the next 2 years' harvest. Volcanic ash has caused over $60 million in damage to crops, livestock and fish farms, based on data from Indonesia's Agriculture Department.
In Peru, a once bustling railway station now serves as a library, museum, and concert center. Called the House of Literature, is one of the favorite places of book lovers. Details on that now in this report.
This former train station is one of Peru's biggest cultural centers. Built in 1912, the station was formally inaugurated as the House of Literature in 2009. Once abandoned, it is now visited by thousands of people every day.
The House of Literature is a space for people to encourage themselves to read and to learn. No, it doesn't exist. I don't know any other places like this. Not at all. This place is quite innovative. In fact, in Chile, there aren't places like this that are so iconic.
One of the star programs involves grandparents telling stories to youngsters. Its objective is to promote reading and literature in children through oral narration. The director of the House of Peruvian Literature says that it is a public cultural center of permanent dialogues.
How can we make an impact on a national level with the precariousness and fragility of our cultural institutions? You can't find cultural centers or art galleries or even museums properly implemented in all of the country's cities.
Milagros Adariaga adds that despite the rapid growth of digital culture, written culture continues to generate curiosity and debates.
I believe that it is a question of investigating. I do not believe that social networks are distancing us from the written word. They might be distancing us from the forms of narration that were consolidated and that are going to perhaps be used less due to the appearance of new forms.
The facade of railway stations has a large iron gate where the letters F and C stand out, revealing its former use as the central railway station. The transformed cultural center has hosted art exhibitions, seminars, and reading circles for youth literature and debates.
Well, in the U.S., Chicago's Shed Aquarium has been forced to close amid the coronavirus pandemic. Amid the closure, the staff decided to let a few residents out of their enclosures for a field trip. More in this report.
What would you do at the Shed Aquarium if you had free time during its closure? Check out the animals, of course. That's what Wellington the penguin did when the aquarium was shuttered due to the new coronavirus COVID-19. The little guy is one of several rockhopper penguins who got to take a walk or a waddle under the guidance of keepers. Meanwhile, in Washington, a state sanctuary for chimpanzees once used for scientific research has scaled back its staff. Workers don personal protective gear to avoid infecting the primates during the pandemic.
We have to, in some ways, assume that we're carrying it, especially because we know that you can be completely asymptomatic but still be carrying it. So we just want to put a barrier between our germs and the chimps as much as we can. So we're all wearing gloves that we're changing frequently, and we're wearing masks to protect them from us.
Human respiratory viruses have caused lethal outbreaks among primates. In late 2016, cases of human coronavirus spread to a community of wild chimpanzees in Ivory Coast.
Dutch aircraft maker Airbus has announced plans to halt operations at its plants in France and Spain for 4 days. The coronavirus crisis spread from battered airlines to the manufacturing sector. In a statement, Airbus said the halt allows sufficient time to implement stringent health and safety conditions. It said the company's shares dropped over 7% in Paris's CAC 40. Deliveries have already been disrupted as the crisis hit airlines hold back from taking possession of aircraft to conserve cash. Meanwhile, the German car maker Volkswagen has also announced to temporarily shut down most of its European plants. The chief executive Herbert Diess said the production plants in Spain, Slovakia and Italy would be halted. Well, stock markets across Asia are trading lower as fears over the economic fallout of COVID-19 continue to rattle investor sentiments. Major stocks in the region continue to shed value amid a lack of rally despite the announcement of coordinated global stimulus packages. Seoul's Kospi is trading over 3% lower. Hong Kong's Hang Seng has lost over 2%. The Nikkei 225 is trading over 1.5% lower after official data revealed Japan's exports declined in February. The Shanghai Composite is trading over 0.5% lower. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil prices have shed 0.75% to trade at $30 a barrel. Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. Well, for the latest updates on these and other stories, you can always follow us on our social media at Indus.news. Thanks for watching this bulletin.